to know enough. Too old to play the part, too cool for showing up. Too dumb to say what's smart, so I'm a substitute waiting for the game to start. But I ain't trying to get played like change your heart. And may I park and find me another ride. I'm letting Florence tell you how I feel inside.
So, maybe an interesting topic of discussion. Why should you never argue with someone on the basis of evidence? And what I mean by that is, like, we'll just say, for example, like evidence for God, for God's existence. Some people think, and I used to think, it's good to argue on the basis of like arguments, like classical arguments, like ontological, teleological, moral argument, cosmological argument. There's all kinds of arguments for God's existence, right? As to say, here is the evidence, and here is, proof that he exists. Well, when talking with someone who doesn't believe that God exists, they're not going to count that as evidence. So in Romans, it talks about all men are left without excuse. And in Ecclesiastes, it talks about this. And in Romans, it talks about the laws written on, every heart. So it's not about thinking that we can just stack up enough evidence to where they'll be like, oh, I got it. This makes perfect sense. It's never about that, because the evidence is always there. It's just the evidence you wish to consider and take on board, right? So, in other words, for someone who has decided that they don't want to believe, there will never be enough evidence that you can present to them in order to finally make a switch or make a change in their mind and their heart or whatever. There's never going to be a sufficient amount, even if, because they're looking through it through a different paradigm altogether. So if someone were to raise from the dead in front of their very eyes, they would first look to hypothetically, a scientific explanation for that event and a reason, for it to have occurred. They wouldn't just accept that it is a miracle or whatever it is, because their paradigm through which they're looking through is not of a metaphysical nature. It's not of something beyond that can't be explained. It can be explained scientifically. Maybe they were never dead to begin with. So their whole framework of looking at evidence is different than someone who actually believes in God. So the evidence for someone to believe is always there. Now, whether or not they choose to accept it as evidence is the contention, the actual issue. So, and how we view the evidence is essentially what matters. So, have you ever seen one of those paintings where it shows like a rabbit and a duck, and it's like the same picture? Maybe I'll find it and put it up on the screen. If not, you can look it up. There's these famous paintings where there's, two different, objects, a duck and a rabbit. And depending on how you look at it, you see one, but you can't see the other. So if you're looking and you see the rabbit, well, you can't see the duck, and vice versa. So evidence is not always an indicator, but it also depends on what you're willing to take in or what you can see. So the evidence is always there, but what you choose to see is, essentially what matters. And two, even if evidence was used as the foundation, it still doesn't prove anything. So for instance, let's just hypothetically say I've been convicted of a crime and all the evidence points to me, but I know that I didn't do it. I know that I'm innocent, despite all this mounting evidence pointing to the fact that, I've done it and I've been convicted, whatever it is, despite the fact that I know that I didn't do it and that I wasn't even there to commit the crime, whatever it is, and all the evidence points saying that I did. So evidence doesn't necessarily mean or point to truth. It just is another way of viewing reality and how you justify your beliefs in something. So, and I'll probably talk about this in another video, but I think arguing from the standpoint of providing evidence to someone as to the existence of God's is the wrong way to do it. Another way to do it will be something that I talk about in another video. But yeah, so that's basically it. Never think you can present an argument from a perspective of, hey, here's the evidence, if they can just look at it from a neutral vantage point, because we don't, and you're not going to, especially when it comes to certain things like that. So yeah, that's pretty much all I've got. If you like this, cool. If not, well, maybe like the next one.